Today, I'd like us to just chat about legacy systems, and I'll be sharing some insights on what I've learned so far and also some anecdotes from other sources as well. So, just to give you a bit of some background, I when I signed up for UXSA this year, I told myself that I'm just going to push myself, and I know that my mentors and seniors would encourage me to do something like this, and it just kept ringing over and over in my head to say, just push yourself, just go out of your comfort zone. So this is me just, shining the spotlight on myself and escaping my comfort zone. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. So, what are legacy systems? Some of you may already be familiar with this concept, and some of you might not be, but if that's the case, then I'm just here to hold your hand for a bit. So legacy systems are basically software that has been around since the old ages. To put it to put it in a nutshell, this is software that's been around for decades, right? For many many years, and it's a type of software that was built around with old code bases, old programming languages, and old tech in a nutshell, basically. And it can usually be found in quite surprisingly many organizations today, not just big companies, but sometimes even smaller companies as well, because it's not just something that's prevalently, common in only big companies. I think almost almost every company has some sort of a legacy system, whether it's internal software or whether it's something that was built to built for clients or built internally. So my talk today will just be basically just in two parts, right? I thought that it'd be smart for me to just split it up into talking about the human side of things, the people side, and the actual software side of things. So I just want to try and walk you through this maze of how it's all just connected, is what I'm trying to say. It's all really just connected, and it's almost like a loop that feeds onto each other. And I know that in today's world, we've got AI, we've got machine learning, we've got robotics, we've got so much happening, and it feels like it's happening at such a fast rate sometimes. You you have these blink and you'll miss it moments in the tech industry, right? You say that you've got an app on your phone, and before you know it, 3, 6 months down the line, there are new updates, new features, new components, new things that are rolling out onto this. And I've chosen these four examples today to talk about them because I feel like it actually adds on to the point that I'm trying to make, right? For example, say YouTube and Instagram mostly. I know that YouTube recently redesigned their interface, and I couldn't help but wonder that this was inspired somehow, some of these new changes were really inspired by Apple's new design, Apple's new design language, right? I see that they're trying to implement this glassy interface, and in a way, it actually makes sense. It actually makes sense. Apple has always been leaning towards these, glassy interfaces, because if you do go back, fun fact, if you do go back to all of their old design libraries, you may see that yes, it was great and it was all simplified, but you'll actually find some small connections into how it feeds onto this new glassmorphic interface that they were trying to roll out. But not to harp on too much about Apple, I wanted to let you know that YouTube did change its interface. So some of you might have noticed it on your computers, but mostly some of you might have noticed it on your smart TVs at home. And actually, to add on to that, Netflix also recently did something like that. They did a rehaul of their interface. They've changed the layout and the navigation, and some of the movie and television cards have actually also changed, right? So it always feels like there's just something new that's happening in tech. But for today's talk, I want us to understand that not every business or not every company has the opportunity to constantly keep rolling out updates and new features and new plans and new ideas in their roadmaps. Sometimes we've got teams and we've got software development teams that have to stay in the background and they have to maintain and improve and update old websites and platforms and make sure that they still function, because these are critical parts of daily business operations. These are critical parts of the business. These are things that our own employees use. These are things that other clients use. These are things that our customers use. So, for example, government websites are most commonly known for this issue of having legacy systems. They are most commonly known, and it can be seen in for some of them, it can be seen in their interfaces, and for some of them, it can actually be seen in their background processes. For example, like the National Background of Investigations Bureau, which is actually an American platform. It was hacked in 2015 due to its outdated tech. And for example, the IRS and SARS are things that actually use outdated software and tech in their platforms. But another example would be the SAP software, right? Now, this one might not truly be a great example to use, because when I was conducting research for my talk, I did notice that some of the SAP platforms are quite modern and clean, and they actually really work really well. But that isn't to say that's the case for all of them across the board. For some companies, they do love to adopt some in-house software, and I'll use SAP as an example, right? And SAP allows you to customize its software to meet your business needs. So it basically just walks into your company, and it in a way it says, hey, what are you planning on using this for? And you can just set it up and start using it normally in whichever way suits you. So this can be a good or bad thing, but I'll touch on how it can be a negative thing. Some companies don't really adopt it in a good way. For example, they could say that they adopt it, for example, to use for internal employee functions, right? But it doesn't exactly work as it would for an employee to be ready to just easily engage with it. Sometimes they still need onboarding, and sometimes they still need to have their hands held. So another example I'd actually like to give you is the Infinity platform. And I'd also just like to provide some background into my current role at the moment. So some of you might be familiar with the ITS software or the iEnabler software. If you went to university or college in, let's say the last 10, 20 years, you might be familiar with the ITS platform. You might have used it, but I'm just going to give you some background on it. So the ITS platform was actually started around 40 years ago, right? I think it's the 40th anniversary this year. It was started around 40 years ago. It was started by mostly developers, right? It had mostly developers behind the helm on it. So it was really meant to be used by higher institutions of learning, such as colleges and universities. And it's been used in South African institutions as well as international institutions, right? And the ITS 4.1, right? It's had 5 versions so far. The 5th version is the Infinity one that I'm currently just going to explain to you about. So the ITS 4.1 is basically the old system, right? It's the old system that there are many seniors in the corporate workplace that have a lot of knowledge on how it functions and how to use it. So the ITS 4.1 works in a very interesting way. It's very dense, it's very extensive, and even some of the most seasoned pros who know the ITS 4.1, they will confidently tell you, they'll still tell you that, I've been in this business for so long, and I've learned how to navigate this big maze of the ITS. And even now, I need you to understand, I need you to know that there are still some parts of it that I don't fully understand. There are still some parts of it that I still need assistance on it. That's how big and dense it is. And the ITS platform isn't really just used for education. In case I haven't mentioned this before, I'm simply in the education division, right? So it can also be used for, say, human resources. It can be used for accountants. It can be used for financial planning. It can be used to serve different parts of the business functions, basically. And it uses, there are extensive manuals and there are codes and there are videos and there are walkthroughs on how you can use ITS platform if maybe you are a student or if you are an administrator, depending on your role. And it works in, to put it in a summary, it works in a very interesting way, right? If you want to look up a specific function to say you want to see a student's qualification, there is a specific code that you will have to type onto the menu. The landing page is a simple search bar with a side menu with all of the functions that you could possibly have. Surprisingly, if you want to say you want to see student qualifications, there is a specific code that will be found in your manual, or you can contact your manager or your senior to let you know what specific code it is. But the manuals all have codes, extensive codes for whatever plans you need. So let me use the Sakado code, for example. You would go to your search bar and type Sakado and maybe a number, maybe it's 23 or 15, depending on what it is. And you would search, and after that, it would populate a menu or a table. It really depends on what kind of function you're searching. And it would show you a table of those qualifications. And sometimes it's hard for you to actually get the information that you need from the ITS platform, from ITS 4.1, because it's really more of a role-based platform. It's about what type of access you have. It's about kind of management, what type of access you have. And if you have access to certain parts of, to view or interact with certain parts of the system, then that's great, that's wonderful. But sometimes there will be many cases where you may not have access to interact with certain parts of the system. So now to bring you back to the Infinity platform. The Infinity platform, also known as ITS 5.0, is the new kid on the block. Basically, it's the modernization of 4.1. It's the redesign. It's the new system in a sense, right? And in order for Infinity to succeed, it actually needs 4.1, right? 4.1 and Infinity need each other, despite that not being ideal sometimes. So Infinity needs to send data back to 4.1, and 4.1 needs to send data to Infinity. So there's a lot of data processing that needs to constantly keep happening on Infinity. Now, so far on the Infinity platform, we've got, let me say, 3 modules, with a 4th incoming one that's coming next year, actually, the registrations module. So far, we've got the admin, applications, and selections module. This is to target the students and admins at higher institutions of learning. So students will have access to the applications part of the journey, because that's where the student life cycle begins. It starts off by them applying for applications, and the applications then move on to the selections component, where the admins at high institutions will then decide to say, oh, okay, we are going to take students for this specific qualification, for this specific department, and we're going to decide if we're going to accept them or we're going to reject them, and we just need a fast way of processing that. And then after that, the admin portal, it's actually an additional bonus where they can configure role-based management and configure the Infinity platform to suit their needs as customers, right? So it's been a very, very big challenge working on the Infinity platform, especially as a designer. This is really where I've had to truly, truly wrap my head inside what it actually means to work inside a legacy system. But I'll expand more on this further down the line. So next up, I want to talk about the people side of working on legacy systems, right? The human side is a very, very crucial and important element of working on legacy systems, right? In enterprises, in large companies, Vitaly Friedman, who many of you might know on LinkedIn, who provides helpful resources to designers, engineers, and product managers every day across the board. He mentions that in enterprises, 40 to 60% of the time is spent managing legacy. This means that we need to have people in the house who can understand how it functions, who can understand what the documentation looks like, who can understand what parts of the business it serves, and who can understand how it impacts daily operations. And common examples of the people side would include having top management and having some knowledge in the room, and who your clients or your customers are, right? So sometimes you'll have scenarios and nuances where top management, the people who are composed of upper management, maybe they do not have a direct line to constantly keep active communication with your core development team to understand what is really, really happening with the intricacies and the nuances of your specific legacy system or systems. So sometimes you'll also have users or clients who are involved in this process, right? To say, for example, to use Infinity as an example, we know that we are in a B2B industry, and we know that we are creating software that can help and assist other businesses, right, to run their daily operations. And we need to understand it's a part of how we need to understand that at essentially at the top level of it, the bigger picture of it, is that there needs to be alignment from everyone. There needs to be alignment from our management. There needs to be alignment from our seniors in the room. There needs to be alignment from our designers in the room. There needs to be alignment from our curators in the room. There needs to be alignment from our product managers in the room, for example, right? So in a way, all of this is just, I don't know if I'm doing a good job painting the picture at the moment, but all of this is just really, really interconnected, and it plays really, really big functions in legacy systems. So just to expand more on each of these points, right? We know that management in many cases, in many scenarios, they will have their own roadmap, they'll have their own vision, they'll have their own plans on how they want to see the team evolving, on how they want to see their digital products evolving, right? But sometimes there comes a time where there isn't really any sort of straightforward alignment with what the core development team faces at the moment and what they see at the moment. Because, for example, when the team faces bugs, when the team faces usability issues, right, and when this is something that impacts the roadmap at a bigger scale, then it becomes a situation where the team needs to constantly keep communicating with the leaders to say that our system is just taking heavy hits at the moment. Our system is not really ready to implement all of this new tech, and our system is just not ready to expand and move in the same pace as our competitors is moving. In fact, it would be more advantageous for us to consider first mitigating these critical issues that we're constantly facing before we can consider all of these other new ideas that are happening in the roadmap. And it's very important to have knowledge in the room when you are navigating legacy systems. What do I mean by this? I mean, it's very important to have knowledge in the room by having people who understand the system, people who have been there for the longest time, and people who know where to find documentation and where you can ask for help and who you can talk to. But also there's another situation involved in here in which you may have to deal with the fact that you might lose teammates, you might lose your team members, or you might lose some of those seniors who are in the room. And this will really impact your team in major ways, because that's a loss of knowledge. And that means that the people who could really understand the tiny little screws and the nuances of how the system works, those are the people who've got big working functional knowledge and who are no longer with us. So that's something you might have to grapple with. And when I speak about users or clients, or when I speak about the customers, what I mean to say is that when you are a person who's working on legacy systems, it's very important that you understand that sometimes as a designer, sometimes as a designer, you will be in an organization in which it started its software, its products, it started development when you were not there. Maybe it started, say, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, and you are joining a moving train, and you will be forced to quickly adapt to its culture, to its business practices, quickly adapt to what it feels like to be working there on a day-to-day basis. And there comes a point in time where you, as the designer, will start caring about your work, will start caring about the work of the business, because at our heart, at the core of our jobs, what we do is someone mentioned empathy during one of the previous talks, we have so much empathy for users, right? Our job is to put ourselves in the user's shoes, right? And it creates some kind of a mental load to know that you are a representation of the users, and you are basically stepping in to create something for them. And this is something that you yourself need to be able to say. If someone asks you tomorrow and be like, hey, you were working on the system, right? Would you yourself be able to use it? Do you see yourself succeeding to use a product like this? So it sort of creates a kind of, I'm not sure what the right word would be, but a kind of mental, uh, a kind of mental load for you as a designer to know that you are working on a product, on legacy products that sometimes they don't always satisfy users exactly the way they should, right? In the way that they should completely be functioning. So sometimes it happens in that kind of way, and it's something that it needs to just sit at the back of your mind. And for my next slide, actually, right, it actually feeds on to what I was saying in this previous one, right? So I'm only realizing now that this title could read as a pun, but what I meant was design needs to be a partner. If you're in an organization that deals with legacy systems, right? Design needs to be something that has a seat at the table and is valued by every member, regardless of whatever role that they play in the company, right? And a company that has a high level of UX maturity. Now, I know that it differs, of course, from one business to one business to one company as well. But a company that has a high level of UX maturity may have an easier time navigating legacy systems, navigating the successes, and navigating the failures as well. Because when you have a design culture in your organization, it is far much more easier for designers to fight for your product as a leader, because they understand and they are in communication with users and they have empathy, and it's much more easier for that to get everyone else on board if your design team is very valued. And now for the last part of this talk, right? I want to talk about the people side of things, and just to acknowledge that little that little subtitle. Just a bit of some context. I work with developers mostly on a day-to-day basis. I have to work with developers on a day-to-day basis, and when they demo, sometimes we make jokes, of course, with our team to say that, oh, but it was working on my computer, but it was working there, but it was working this. Where are you demoing from? Have you launched to the Q environment? Have you launched to the prod? Are you just using localhost? And we sometimes make those type of jokes about that. So that's where that cheeky little one-liner came from. Now, the software side of things is actually a very interesting part about this. So legacy systems, whether we like it or not, demand workarounds. And I can't fully speak for other team members, but I can confidently speak for designers when I say that legacy systems will force you to design for workarounds. And this isn't to say that I will not acknowledging the active communication and collaborative efforts that will always be involved in your role as a designer. It's your job to always, speak to your team members, to always speak to your devs, to always speak to everybody to make sure that everybody is aligned and on board. But what I mean with this section is that, with this part, when I say workarounds, is that sometimes you will face issues on legacy systems, and of course, it's important to come up with multiple solutions, right? And what I want you to understand is that sometimes your best ideas will not make it to the final cut, right? Sometimes your best ideas will be blocked by engineering failures. Sometimes they will be blocked by business processes. Sometimes they will be blocked by client and customer needs. And sometimes these workarounds will really force you to take your best ideas and abandon them, despite fighting and fighting, and no matter how much advocacy you do for that. And that's one of the things that you may need to grapple with. So, just to expand more on the team capacity, right? If you are a small design team, or maybe if you are a solo designer, you will have a very, very different experience compared to, say, let's say designers who are in a full team, who are working on greenfield projects, perhaps. And sometimes you may find that you are taking on a lot more responsibility depending on the nature of this platform and how big it is. Sometimes you may find that you are taking on a lot more responsibility on this, and it's very, very easy for you to be overwhelmed. It's very, very easy, because you know when you are in charge of so many systems, sometimes it's easy to forget that a support structure is important, and it's easy to forget when you do not see yourself burning out, right? It's easy for you to take on too much workload because of the high nature of the job, or the very demands of your team. So team capacity is very, very important, because you will need a shoulder to rely on. You will need support systems to rely on. And that's something that you should also keep in mind. And to add on to the team capacity, a lot of the team dynamics as well are very, very important when you are working on legacy systems, right? Now, what I mean by this is that there are many positives to this, and you will grow in immense ways as a designer, right? But there will always be that component of you that knows that when you are working on legacy systems, a lot of time needs to be spent on maintenance, and a lot of time needs to be spent on making sure that all new features or all new elements of the system are up to date and they are functioning properly and everything runs as smoothly as it's intended. But I want to expand on the firefighting culture. And this isn't only something that may affect you as a designer, but this is something that you will feel the hardest as a designer, because it actually adds on to my point about workarounds, right? When you are spending so much time on standby and you are waiting for, say, some issues that are related to do with the development side, or maybe they are related to do with general UX issues that now need to be reworked and revised. There may come a time where it feels like you are a firefighter and you are constantly just putting bandages and elastoplastics on issues, right? But this is also something that adds on to my last point on the slide, which is about diplomacy, right? As a designer, you will grow a lot, and part of this includes your diplomacy skills. So what I mean by this is that there will come a point that you may find that once you fully understand what kind of environment you're in, and once you fully understand what type of systems you are working on, right, it's very important to always try and meet your teammates halfway. And this is by reminding yourself that you are all fighting for one successful goal, right? It may look like you are the only person sometimes who is pushing for better functioning systems, but it also sometimes there will come a point where you may need to understand that in as much as you are navigating this labyrinth thing, this labyrinth of a maze that is already a moving train that is already running. There will come a time where you do need to understand that it's important to be the middleman. It's important to be the guy who can speak up in the room, and this is part of the skills that it will teach you. So the user reality of legacy systems is an interesting one. this isn't to say that it's always doom and gloom, it's always bad, right? But sometimes you may find that you are working on platforms that cannot be everything for everyone. And you'll find that some clients would like you to adopt their workflows. They would like to impose their workflows onto our own systems, right? And that is something where that is where your people skills will come into play. And that is where we need to remind ourselves that unfortunately sometimes we will not be able to cover all the ground. Sometimes we will not be able to satisfy every other user, every other business that would like to continue their workflows around this. So how does this impact your momentum as a designer? 50% of the time, you will have to make space to accommodate time in your schedule to troubleshoot bugs on the system. This could be bugs that are happening perhaps on the live systems, or this could be bugs that are happen that you could potentially see happening in future, right? So for this next slide of mine, I just need to add a little bit of some context. I did not want to actually broach this part of the conversation. I was terrified of it, but I reminded myself that what's the purpose of trying to initiate a discussion like this if I'm not going to even try and talk about this type of specific topic on it, right? So legacy systems are great because they teach you so many skills and they, in a way, really stretch you a lot as a designer. But sometimes there may come a point where you will have to realize that the mission is so much bigger than you as a designer. And this is part of where your systems thinking skills might come into play, right? And the truth is, there are not always great career opportunities. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's really whoa, it's a doom and gloom type of situations, but that is something to just note that sometimes it just means that in a way, when you can see the health of a product, when you can see the beating heart of something, when you can see so much potential in your work, when you can see so much potential in your work and how it all fits into the bigger processes of the business, right? You cannot help, like I mentioned before, you cannot help but feel a sort of pride sometimes to say that you may be a tiny piece in the puzzle, but you are impacting a very, very, very big game that's at play here, right? And this also adds on to my other point that says that, in a way, you might have to design for the system sometimes and not for the user sometimes. And it's very important for you as a designer to practice some sort of discernment. And this is something that I myself have had to learn with my current role in the Infinity education space. It's something that I've had to learn to say that when it didn't really happen overnight. It just clicked one day. It just clicked because I finally understood the context of what we're actually doing. And what I mean by this is that when I speak about system limitations, I mean that it simply just adds on to my previous point to say that when you are trying to solve issues and to try and improve legacy systems and the functionality, you may really have to not just advocate but fight. You may have to fight, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing as designers. We are always fighting as designers. We are not really strangers to the concept of having to advocate and fight for things. But at the end of the day, sometimes there will come a time where you may not necessarily win the fight. You may have to understand that perhaps the fact that these platforms were built on very outdated architecture, and some of the choices that were made when these systems were being built some of the choices were not always great, they were not always wise, and that is something that's going to affect you now in the present day with your work. And that is something that's just here to keep in mind as well. So it's not all doom and gloom, of course, like I mentioned. There are some positives to navigating legacy systems, right? Besides the obvious point that I've mentioned before of how it all strengthens your skills and it forces you to become a better designer, it molds you, right? It also teaches you resilience, and it also teaches you how so many of these skills that we have as UX and UI designers, as researchers, so many of these small niche skills that we have are just expanded in such a big way. It's almost as if someone's taking a magnifying glass and just forcing you to really work on those skills of yours. And with my point about resilience, it really teaches you to just stay in there and hang in there and stay strong. And how sometimes you'll have wins. You'll have wins. Sometimes you will have positive wins, right? Sometimes you'll have wins that maybe you did not see them 6 months ago, but you're seeing them now in the future, right? So my tips would be for you to please take it one step at a time. Please remember that you may need to really understand, to deeply understand, to have a deep, intimate working knowledge of how these platforms work. And sometimes you may need to really take it one step at a time. And sometimes you may need to not just become, a facilitator, but a person who can advocate for small changes. That's where some of your biggest wins may come from. Sometimes you will have to advocate for the smallest changes. And sometimes you may not get to, you may not get to have an ideal design process of saying that, because we know that maybe, say, this specific feature on the system is really outdated, and a simpler way to do it would be to have a step-by-step process to do A, B, C, D. Sometimes you may not have the green light on those kind of ideas, right? And that's why it's very important for you to really take it in doses, in increments, in small steps at a time. I think that's really the best way of knowing that you will succeed if you really slow down. And even in fast-paced businesses and companies and organizations, if you slow down, if you really slow down and try and understand the problem at hand, right, you may figure out so many solutions that are possible that you may not have even known. So in conclusion, right, just to add on to my experience, right, I have grown in the most extreme ways since I've joined the wonderful Infinity team. So I've learned that it's quite important to be a student, right? It's very important, regardless of whether I'm a junior, whether I'm mid-level, whether I'm in a senior position. It's very important to always be a student and to really keep an open mind and to tell yourself that you are going to learn, right? You are always going to learn. And when I first joined the Infinity team, I will have to be honest, it was extremely terrifying. It was a terrifying opportunity for me because I was having to fill in the shoes of really good designers, really great designers who left. And that put a lot of pressure on me. But as time went on, I had a good support system. And I've learned to understand not just team dynamics, but the actual heart of what it is that we do and what it is that we are hoping to achieve in the next few years. It's a really big mission. So it's in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that legacy systems will turn you into a student, and it's very important that we keep learning and we keep being open-minded, because there are so many nuances and ways of working that some of us here might not be exposed to, some of us might not be aware of. But if you keep an open mind to be a student, then I really think that you may have an easier time wading through the labyrinth of complex legacy systems. So, in conclusion, thank you, everyone, and I just want to say this has been a very good experience getting to share some insights and some of my knowledge with you guys. And if you've got any questions, then I am open to the floor. I'll just switch over my tab so I can see the questions.
We've got some questions for you, Sizwe. Thank you so much for that talk. Lots of good feedback from everyone. I'll jump into the first question. So the first question is from Amy Taylor. As a designer, how do you make the case to senior leadership to upgrade your legacy system, considering the financial and time investment we're asking them to make?
Thank you for this question, Amy. This is a very good one, actually. So to just try and answer you this one, right? A fun fact about the Infinity platform, right? When it was first pitched, and this is something that the product manager, the old product manager actually gave us when we were all starting out as part of the new team. So what they did was they compiled, say, how do I explain this? I've got papers here. So they basically compiled a case of they compiled some research, right? They were basically detectives, right? And they pitched, they made, how do I explain this? Oh my goodness. They basically pitched a case on why they need to update and upgrade their system, right? This was from the context that there was a lot of developers, there was a lot of people who would be able to take on a new project, right? They first looked at the environment and they said, do we have people who would be able to take this on? Do we have enough capacity for this? Do we have something to do this? And after that, they compiled a case, right? They compiled a case to say that what if we could say make ITS a simpler system, right? And what if we could show the evidence of what we have? What if we could show the evidence of what we have? So what they did was they asked for buy-in. They had many conversations with leadership. They asked for buy-in to say that we need time and investment for you to do this. And they proved the benefits. They did research and they proved the benefits of what this would mean if they adopted Infinity, if they started the Infinity project. They did really extensive research to say that other platforms, other companies have done this, and here's the evidence. They've done this, and here's the evidence. So I'd say if you can show numbers and if you can prove how this could make a positive impact, then I think you may have an easier case proving your point. I hope that helps answers the question.
Thank you. I'll jump into the next question because we have a few before we jump into our next talk. So the next one is from Maru. Do you have any advice for or how to keep knowledge in the room? What have you tried that worked and what did not work?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for this question, Maru. This is a good one. This is a really great question. So to keep knowledge in the room, right? When I joined, this question really hits home. So when I joined, to keep knowledge in the room, I spent I think around 4 weeks asking questions to say to ask what kind of knowledge do we have and what kind of documentation do we have. So let me just so there's actually two ways of going about this, right? There are, like I mentioned, there is the ITS 4.1, There are the people who are so knowledgeable about it. There are the older generations who are extremely knowledgeable about it. And they already have, they've written extensive documentation on this, and they already have everything, all resources, a lot of resources that will help new employees joining the company, whether you are going to be working on the 4.0 system or whether you're going to be working on all the newer systems, including Infinity. They've created a hub of live documentation where they update the system and they keep an active record of it. So if, say, one of the old members leaves the company, then that is something that the hub is always still there and anyone can access it. With regards to the Infinity side of things, this one is a very tricky one because I do remember that, especially from a design perspective, right? There is also an extensive side of knowledge with the design side of things. There are SharePoint slides, there are PowerPoint presentations, but there isn't really a unified single hub. So that was a very, very big challenge that I had to face in there. But to keep knowledge in the room, what I've done is advocate for documentation, right? Fun fact is that I actually spent, I think, months fighting with my senior about why we need active documentation in the room, not just for the 4.1 side, but also for the Infinity side, because this is something that's a very big challenge to face, right? So what I've done is that I've almost created a culture of documentation to keep knowledge in the room, to say that if there are bugs or issues that need to be handled, then we will resolve it as a team. But I will also leave notes on the system, and I also leave communication, and I also leave anywhere I can to leave notes to say that this happened and this was a solution that we solved, right? And not just that, but I've also practiced all of the lessons that I've learned in my from all of the previous seniors and mentors who've shaped me so far in my career, to say that I've learned to start practicing cleaner Figma files, better notes, and better organization, and better folders. And I've learned to start practicing culture of organization, because what this means is that I'm not only just doing this for myself, but I'm also trying to help the designer behind me who may come and have to join me and work on these same platforms as well. So that's something that I've done. I've started advocating for an active culture of knowledge and documentation in the room. That was such a long answer.
Sorry, I was just fighting with the button over there. Thank you. So the next one is from Caleb. Caleb Pillay. So he says it's really resonated with the talks as well. You touched on some key insights there when working with legacy systems. Well done. Out of curiosity, do you have any smart solutions that you're proud of for the outcome, or that come to mind given the constraints you have in this environment?
Yes, I love this question. Yes, I do. I've got a very, very decent sized backlog of some of the solutions that I've managed to implement that I'm actually proud of. So one of them would be to cleaning up the design library. I've had extensive conversations with the developers and the team to actually unify our design library, because it was very scattered, right? And we have now started adopting small increments across the system to unify it and keep it all using the same button, same components, same elements as well. And there are many features as well that I've managed to actually get buy-in for, from not just the development team, but also from management and from the my product managers as well, features such as the document system on the Infinity platform, features such as the iEnabler modernization features on the Infinity platform as well. And there are actually quite a few these examples that I've just mentioned now. They've actually compounded into helping me with all other future projects that I may need to take on in the Infinity platform. For example, there was a project as well. It's called Exam Management Insights. It's meant for higher educations as well, to keep an extensive system of exam management from students and to approve and reject. It's quite a big system, right? But it's something that I've had to start from scratch, and I've had to understand how it functions as well. So these small features that I was able to get buy-in on and win on Infinity, they've actually helped me a great deal, because now that means that all other feature projects as part of the Infinity roadmap that may happen in future, we will all have an easier time adopting them, and we won't have to have extensive conversations about all of our constraints now, because we know that we have evidence. We've done this before, and now all we can do is try and do it at a bigger scale. So yes, yes, yes. To answer your question, Caleb, there are wins, and these wins have compounded.
Thank you. We've got two more questions. This is from Simone. Sizwe, you really hit me in the feels and made me feel like I'm not alone. Thank you. Do you have advice on how to approach the UX of a legacy system if the client does not want to adapt to new industry standard UX, but wants to keep using legacy systems for old UX?
I do have some advice on this, Simone. Thanks for your question. So, like I mentioned before, I think the most important element of this is to get buy-in, right? But if you can't get buy-in, then I think that maybe it's best to share how this could possibly improve the business functions. Maybe it would be a good idea to try and meet the client where they are, right? To try and speak their honest. I don't know if I mentioned this during one of my slides, but it might be a good idea to consider meeting them where they are, right? To say that since they say they don't want to, adopt newer tech that could potentially improve this, maybe we could meet them where they are halfway, to say that we've seen how this could possibly benefit you, and if we maybe it would be a good idea to just I'm losing my train of thought, guys. A good idea to show them in small ways, in small increments, to say that to take a feature or a workflow, for example, to take a workflow and say, this is what for example, this is what you're currently using, right, to sort out your document system or to sort out your paper filing system. If you simply put a small little feature like this on Wix, and it could change your workflow for the better. This is a tough one. So yeah, I think by showing, if you can, Simone, by trying to show a little bit of an impact on how this could possibly improve their systems, no matter how small, I think that could be a very, very big step in trying to win them over.
Thank you. We've got one last question from Maru. Such an insightful reflection about how this impacts your career and what skills you've taken away, Sizwe. The question: what is the one thing you are doing to keep your creative cup full when working on legacy systems?
Oh, thanks for the question again, Maru. What I've done to keep my creative cup full is that I've started working on small. Okay. I don't know. It's gonna be hard to explain. I've started working on small projects on my in my spare time, small projects, and I've started working on. So these small projects, right? It doesn't have to be like full blown case studies, right? I've started working on small projects to say that, for example, let me give you an example. If I see something that sometimes I'm always looking for design inspiration, right? It's part of my daily routine. It's part of my ritual, actually. And I would look for design inspiration to say, let me see how people are making modals. Let me see how people are making tabs now. Let me see how people are making certain different components. And I take that and I put a spin on it. And sometimes I play around with it. And in fact, I actually do that quite a lot when I'm working on Infinity, but I found that it feels very, very fun when I take that and work on it in my own personal capacity, and I found that going for walks, this is going to sound very, very weird, but it's okay. Going for walks actually also replenishes my creative cups. And it's more easier to just notice the environment around you and how design actually impacts us every single day in our lives, right? When you when you look at your TV stand, or when you look at your couch, or when you look at a cup, right? Sometimes I'll be in my kitchen, bring a cup of coffee, and then I'll look at it and I'll say, we've really come we've really come a long way as a society. Look at this. It's a cup, it works, I can do what I need to do, and I don't have to think twice about it. I don't have to have a mental workload about it. So I've learned to be very observant, more observant of my environment now, and noticing nature and noticing my surroundings, and just thinking about things for even just a minute and a half to say that this is really great. And that's part of how I've been refilling my creative cup.
Sizwe, thank you.